The Philippine Air Force. The PAF is responsible for both defending the Philippine airspace and conducting aerial operations throughout the Philippines, such as close air support operations, combat air patrols, aerial reconnaissance missions, airlift operations, tactical operations and aerial humanitarian operations. The PAF is headquartered at the Villamor Air Base in Pasay, and is headed by the Chief of the Air Force, who also serves as the branch's highest-ranking military officer. The PAF has an estimated strength of over 15,000 personnel and operates 211 aircraft. The forerunners of the Philippine Air Force was the Philippine Militia, otherwise known as Philippine National Guard. On March 17, 1917, Senate President Manuel Quezon enacted a bill for the creation of the Philippine Militia. It was enacted in anticipation that there would be an outbreak of hostilities between United States and Germany. By the end of the First World War, the U.S. Army and Navy began selling aircraft and equipment to the Philippine Militia Commission. The commission then hired the services of the Curtis Flying School to provide flight training to 33 students at Camp Claudio, Parañaque. The early aviation unit was, however, still lacking enough knowledge and equipment to be considered as an air force and was then limited only to air transport duties. On January 2, 1935, Philippine military aviation was activated when the 10th Congress passed Commonwealth Act 1494 that provided for the organization of the Philippine Constabulary Air Corps light bombers, reconnaissance aircraft, light transport and trainers. They later engaged the Japanese when they invaded the Philippines in 1941-42 and were reformed in 1945 after the country's liberation. The PAF became a separate military service on July 1, 1947, when President Manuel Roxas issued Executive Order No. 94. This order created the Philippine Naval Patrol and the Air Force as equal branches of the Philippine Army and the Philippine Constabulary under the now Armed Forces of the Philippines, becoming Southeast Asia's third air force as a result. The main aircraft type in the earlier era of the PAF was the P-51 Mustang, flown from 1947 to 1959. Ground attack missions were flown against various insurgent groups, with aircraft hit by ground fire but none shot down. In the 1950s, the Mustang was used by the Blue Diamonds aerobatic display team. These would be replaced by the jet-powered North American F-86 Sabres in the late 1950s. Assisted by Lockheed T-33 Shooting Star and Beechcraft T-34 Mentor trainers. The PAF saw its first international action in the Congo under the UN peacekeeping mission in 1960. During the 70s, the PAF was actively providing air support for the AFP campaign against the MNLF forces in central Mindanao. Aside from doing the airlifting duties for troop movements from Manila and Cebu to the war zone, traditional workhorses like the UH-1H choppers, L-20 Beaver aircraft, and C-47 gunships were mainly used in the campaign. In the same decade, the PAF Self-Reliance Development Group, the forerunner of the Air Force Research and Development Center, was created. The center enabled the PAF to create prototypes of aircraft aside on going into partnership with the private sector for some of its requirements. In late 1977, the Philippine government purchased 35 second-hand U.S. Navy F-8Hs that were stored at Davis Monthan, AFB in Arizona. 25 of them were refurbished by Watt and the remaining 10 were used for spare parts. As part of the deal, the U.S. would train Philippine pilots in using the TF-8A. They were mostly used for intercepting Soviet bombers. The F-8s were grounded in 1988 and were finally withdrawn from service in 1991 after they were badly damaged by the Mount Pinatubo eruption, and have since been offered for sale as scrap. On February 24, 1986, at the height of the EDSA revolution, the 15th Strike Wing defected to the Remos and Ryle camp, taking their squadrons of S-76, Sikorsky, that later dictated the EDSA People Power Revolution, which effectively ended the Marcos rule. The following years remained hostile for the Philippines. A series of bloody coup attempts led by then Colonel Gregorio Honasan of the Reform the Armed Forces movement involved thousands of renegade troops, including elite units from the Army and Marines, in a coordinated series of attacks on Malacanang and several major military camps in Manila and surrounding provinces, including Sangli and Villamor Air Base, using the T-28 aircraft for aerial assaults. President Corazon Aquino found it necessary to request United States support to put down the uprising. As a result, a large U.S. Special Operations Force was formed and named Operation Classic Resolve. As USAF F-4 fighter aircraft stationed at Clark Air Base patrolled above rebel air bases, and 2 aircraft carriers were positioned off the Philippines. The U.S. operation soon caused the coup to collapse. Additional U.S. forces were then